Hello, friends. I want to share with you today's today's conversation with my digital AI assistant, and here's the query: can you help formulate the following argument from me, but add any resources that you might have? The argument is as follows: the brain is a localized complex pattern in the field of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is easy to solve if we understand that consciousness is a field as in Eastern wisdom traditions. The field is non-local and modifies itself into all phenomena. Mind, brain, body, and the universe are perceptual and cognitive experiences, and they are consciousness modifying itself into all experience, including the experience we call the brain. Consciousness does this by modifying itself first as perceptual activity and then cognitive ability. And the combination of these is the complex pattern of the field of non-local consciousness that pervades all space and time. Here's the answer. The brain as a localized complex pattern in the consciousness field. The notion that consciousness is a non-local field that manifests itself into various phenomena, including the brain, is a fascinating concept that merits further exploration. This argument delves into the idea that the brain is a localized complex pattern within the broader field of consciousness. And this perspective could potentially solve the hard problem of consciousness. Consciousness as a non-local field. Eastern wisdom traditions have long held the view that consciousness is a non-local field that permeates all of existence. This idea suggests that consciousness is not confined to individual minds or brains, but rather is a fundamental aspect of the universe itself. From this perspective, consciousness is not a product of the brain, but rather a primordial field that gives rise to the brain and all other phenomena. The brain as a localized pattern in consciousness. If we accept the premise that consciousness is a non-local field, then the brain can be seen as a localized complex pattern within this field. The brain's intricate neural networks, synaptic connections, and electrochemical processes are manifestations of consciousness modifying itself into a specific pattern or form or phenomenon. The brain is not the source of consciousness, but rather a product of consciousness expressing itself in a particular way. Perceptual and cognitive capacities as modifications of consciousness. According to your view, the perceptual and cognitive capacities that we associate with the brain are not separate from consciousness, but are rather modifications of consciousness. When consciousness manifests as perceptual activity, it gives rise to our sensory experiences of the world. When consciousness modifies itself as cognitive ability, it enables us to process and make sense of these perceptions. The hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness refers to the challenge of explaining how subjective first-person experiences arise from the objective third-person processes of the brain. If consciousness is seen as a product of the brain, it becomes difficult to account for the qualitative experiential aspects of consciousness. However, if we consider consciousness as a non-local field that gives rise to the brain, the hard problem may be resolved. Solving the hard problem through the field of consciousness. By understanding consciousness as a non-local field that modifies itself into all phenomena, including the brain, we can potentially solve the hard problem of consciousness. If consciousness is the fundamental ground of being, then subjective experiences are not separate from or dependent on the brain, but are rather intrinsic aspects of consciousness itself. The brain, as a localized pattern in the field of consciousness, serves as a medium for consciousness to express itself in a particular way, but it is not the source of consciousness. The idea that the brain is a localized complex pattern in the field of consciousness is a very compelling perspective that challenges the traditional view of consciousness as a product of the brain. By considering consciousness as a non-local field that modifies itself into all phenomena, including the brain and its perceptual and cognitive capacities, we may be able to solve the hard problem of consciousness and gain a deeper understanding of the nature of reality and our own subjective experiences. Then I asked it to expand on Eastern wisdom traditions, viewing the relationship between consciousness and the brain. Here's the answer. Eastern wisdom traditions generally view consciousness as a fundamental non-local field that pervades all existence rather than being produced by or confined to the brain. Here are some key perspectives. The Advaita Vedanta school holds that pure consciousness, Brahman, is the ultimate reality, and the brain and physical world arise from this field of consciousness. The mind and brain are seen as localized modifications or expressions of this underlying consciousness. In Buddhism, particularly the Yogacarya and Tibetan Buddhist schools, consciousness is viewed as a continuum or stream that is not produced by the brain. The brain is seen as a basis for the manifestation of consciousness, but not as its source or creator. Consciousness is understood to exist independently of the physical body. The 14th Dalai Lama describes mind or consciousness as an entity that has the nature of mere experience. It is non-material, with the dual aspects of clarity, producing cognitive phenomena, and knowing, perceiving those phenomena. The brain facilitates, but does not generate this fundamental consciousness. In essence, these traditions posit that consciousness is a primordial non-physical field or ground of being from which the brain and physical reality emerge, rather than consciousness originating from or being produced by the brain itself. The brain is viewed as a localized pattern or modification within this broader field of consciousness. Well, that's it. I think it makes logical sense because neural correlates, even though they are correlates of experience, cannot actually show how those neural correlates and the electrochemical activities of those neural correlates can produce any experience, including insight, intuition, imagination, intention, longing, yearning, doubt, hate, jealousy, love, compassion, joy, equanimity, the infinite range of human experience. So I hope this makes sense to you, but I would love to get your feedback.